All right, so it looks like we are ready to go. So we're going to begin this class today with the return of the social media professional development program. So we took a hiatus there for a couple of weeks, but now we are back. So if you would like to continue on with this, with assignment number 6, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to continue developing your brand. And we started doing this in the previous assignments where we would retweet articles in psychology that was from an area that you were interested in. And that helps develop your brand, that helps let your network know what you're all about. What we're going to do now is we're going to continue developing that by letting your network know that you are current in the field, that you know the latest things that are going on in psychology. So to do that, we're going to tweet 2 recent articles about any area of psychology that you're interested in. And what we mean by recent is we mean they came out this month. So this can again be about any aspect of psychology that you're interested in, anything that you might be passionate about. So for example, there's been some major changes that I've been trying to accomplish myself. So I'm very interested now in things that spark people to make major changes. So this would be an example of an article to retweet. It's from Psychology Today. And as you can see, it was posted November 16th, so it is very current. And then this one right here has more to do with educational psychology. Brilliant philosophers and funny psychology instructors. What a data visualization tool tells us about how students see their professors. So they literally analyzed the text from student course evaluations and noticed that there are certain trends in certain courses. So certain courses, philosophers are seen as brilliant. Psychologists, more than any other, are seen as funny. And then it also had ways that female versus male instructors were interpreted by students. So again, recent, November 14th. So anything that you might be interested in, one of the easiest ways to find these recent articles, if you are struggling with that, is to just Google the area of psychology you're interested in, so developmental psychology, clinical psychology. And then when you get the results, just hit the news tab, and that tab will kind of organize the latest things that came out in the popular media about that particular area. So that's how I came across the brilliant philosophers and funny psychology instructors. So for this time, use the hashtag IUSB share psych. So that'll be the hashtag that will allow me to track involvement. And this is going to be due Monday, November 25th by midnight. All right, any questions about social media development number 6? All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to continue our look at single subject designs. We've looked at quasi-experimental independent variables in our wrap-up of the what does it all mean for the halo effect research. So now we're going to continue our look at single case, small n experimental designs. But before we get to that, we do need to talk about the research paper, specifically the final major section. So you've submitted your discussion sections. I saw that some of you have already started the peer reviews on that. So now we're going to talk about that final major section that you're going to write, which is the introduction section. What's the content? What's the APA requirement? And then we'll do a quick recap of the small n design, and then finish up with our look at Harry. He was in the middle of being treated, so we're going to see the outcome of that treatment today. All right, so for your introduction section is basically exactly what it says. It's the introduction to your paper. It is your introducing of the subject to your reader. So in terms of content, in terms of what needs to go in there, you need to, first and foremost, your biggest goal in the introduction is to make your reader aware of what is the problem that you are trying to solve. Why does your paper exist? Why should they read this paper? So you're trying to convince them in your introduction that what you have to say is important to psychology, to human behavior. So what is it? What was missing? Basically, what is the challenge that you are trying to answer with this research paper? So for us, the problem would be, how does false memory work in groups? That's what we're trying to explain. So by the end of your introduction, your reader should sit there and say, oh, okay, I get it. This is all about false memories in groups. So you want to introduce what the problem is. Then you also want to show how past research is connected to the study that we're doing. So how is the past research connected to the reported study? So you can't just start a story, which is again what this research paper is. You can't just start a story with no basis, with no ties to other information. So the classic intro to a fairy tale is that once upon a time, and you know as soon as you read once upon a time that you are dealing with a particular genre, you're dealing with a particular tropes, with particular cliches, and if you run across a passage about a unicorn, it will make complete sense to you just because of that once upon a time. That's what your past theories are going to bring in. So this is where you would want to talk about and introduce the idea of reconstructed memory. And talk about Roediger and McDermott, and talk about Deese's studies on how is memory remade every single time you try to remember it. This is also where you're going to bring in group cognition and group memory. You'll bring in Weldon and Bellinger and explain what group cognition is, what are some of the findings of group cognition. You're basically going to be setting up the problem of how does false memory work in groups. And then you're going to say, well, this is what we know about false memory. And this is what we know about groups. So it's kind of leading your reader on a path to understand why is it that they should read this study. So again, start off with what the problem is. Then you indicate past research that is connected to your study to try to answer that problem. So what led to this problem being researched, and what theories does it check? So that's your kind of overall goal. In terms of how to write this, and you can use this as your sort of outline for your introduction section. This first tip is not done by everybody, but I find it a very friendly way to introduce the idea to your reader. Try to start your paper with a description of a real-world phenomenon that illustrates the problem that you're going to be taking a look at. So, for example, in one of the papers that I wrote that had to do with looking at pictures and picture perspective, I didn't launch in right at the beginning by saying something like, perspective is a projection geometry that determines the conic section intersected with a 2D plane of a 3D projection to a single point. You started that way and your reader's like, I don't what? And they put your paper down and you're Deese, you're not going to be read. Instead of doing that, I just started with a real world phenomenon. And I said, when we walk in front of a masterpiece, such as Raphael's School of Athens, showing scholars discussing in a great hall, we are entertaining a scene drawn in perspective. So I basically said, hey, when you look at a painting, you're looking at perspective. And that's something that everybody can understand, and they can start rooting their cognitive framework to this idea and say, all right, I get it. He's talking about pictures. He's talking about looking at pictures, realistic pictures like in the Renaissance. So then when I finally say, oh, and by the way, here's all the geometry, they have a foundation to build upon. They're like, oh, you're talking about like paintings and stuff, then they can get it. So try to start with a real world phenomenon, a description of a group situation where a false memory occurred. And it could be a hypothetical, it could be real, it could be an example from pop culture. So you're not allowed to use this one because I want you to try to come up with one yourself. But the phrase, beam me up, Scotty, which was a sort of catchphrase for Trek fans and was just assigned to the world of Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty was never said in the original TV series. It's a false memory. And if you ask people, give me a quote from the original TV series, any even just regular person who knows of Star Trek will say, oh, beam me up, Scotty. It never happened in the series. If you have that as the beginning of your description, people will understand, oh, okay, so we're talking about a false memory. Beam me up, Scotty never actually occurred. People think it occurred. And we're also talking about a group of people. I kind of get it. We're talking about false memories in a group. So start with that real world phenomenon. Not allowed to use beat me up, Scotty. Then you introduce the past research. So once they know about the phenomenon, once they've anchored their brain to that idea, then you can start introducing the past research. Then you can start talking about, once they know they're looking at a picture, then I can start talking about mathematical projections. Once they know we're talking about false group memory, then you can start talking about group cognition. It's not going to hit them out of nowhere. Then you can start talking about false memories and reconstructive memory. They'll be prepared for it. So that's when you introduce the past research. Then, and this is an important one, you need to show that there's a gap in the research. That's the problem. That's why this paper exists. So you need to have some sort of explanation that while there is a lot of research that investigates reconstructive memory processes and false memories in the individual, and while there is a lot of research that takes a look at cognitive effects in groups, there is no research that takes a look at reconstructive memory in a group setting. That's why this paper exists. So you identify that there's something missing in the research. There's something missing in psychology. There's a hole in psychology, a gaping lack in our knowledge. And then once you say, hey, take a look at this, nobody has done this before, nobody knows the answer to this, oh, and by the way, we're going to answer that. So our study is going to look at false memories in groups. Our study is going to look at the effects of group cognition on false memories. So you indicate that you're going to fill the gap, and then you end with your hypothesis. You end with the statement that if this theory that I introduced here is correct, and we test groups for false memories, we should find this. If this other theory that I introduced here is correct, and we test groups for false memories, then this other thing should occur. 2 hypotheses would be great. You need at least 1. And that's what you end with. You end with that if this is true, and we test individuals in groups for false memories, this is what we should find. And once you end with that, they are ready to hear the method section, which is the next section that comes up, which is here's how we're going to actually do it. So that is your outline for what needs to go into the introduction section. Any questions about that content aspect of it? All right. Okay, so that was the content. APA requirements. All previous requirements are being carried along into this new draft. So all the margin requirements, citation requirements, that's going to be a big one. But everything that came out in the method section, results section, discussion section. The headers, you're probably not going to need them, but if you do like to organize your intro with headers, make sure that your headers are formatted correctly. Times New Roman, 1-inch margins all around, all that stuff. If you write a number, make sure that you know, should it be the number 5 or should it be the word 5? Okay, so make sure that you check all your previous requirements. And then the new requirements, in terms of the organization of the report, stick to the outline that I just presented. But if you want a second opinion, you can check your textbook for what they say goes into an introduction. It'll basically be a restatement of what I just told you, maybe with a few extra features added, but again, we're kind of doing a simplified version for that first time you're writing a research paper. All right, any questions about the APA style of this? It's really nothing really new being introduced in terms of APA style. And then this introduction section will not be peer reviewed. You will not submit a draft for peer review. This is going to be your opportunity to self-critique and sort of self-review. That's a good skill to develop. That's a good skill to make sure that you have. And this, once you're done with your introduction section, the first time you will submit it is as part of your research paper, your final research paper. So then again, this is going to be your opportunity to self-critique and improve your writing in that way. So there's no due date on the introduction section draft because you're not handing in the draft. This will be part of your final research paper. All right, any final questions on this before we take a look at single subject? All right. So back to the single subject research. So once again, this was designs that we took a look at for treatments, basically for experiments where there were a small number of patients. And this is going to be important for many of you because if you go into experimental psychology, you'll need to know these techniques. If you go into clinical psychology and you're treating patients, you will use these techniques to determine is your treatment effective. And again, these are specialized techniques that were developed because when you are dealing with a single subject and your treatment looks to be effective, so you're treating panic attacks, the person starts off with panic attacks, and after the treatment, their panic attacks are reduced. Even though that looks like your treatment is effective, we need to figure out, just because we're dealing with one subject, coincidentally, did something else happen? So there is a high enough probability where you need to be concerned that when you started your treatment, something else happened to this individual, and that something else is what was really causing the change in their behavior. And as a psychologist, we need to identify that something else, because that means that our treatment isn't effective. And it would be unethical to misguide our client and say, oh yeah, the treatment seems to be working, when the treatment doesn't actually work. So we saw a couple of ways to do this. First one, reversal design, and that is where you again try to isolate, is it that something else? And it could be multiple explanations for changes in behavior. Things can happen within a subject. Things can happen in the subject's environment. People can move in and out of their lives. Situations can change. Internal maturation can occur. Head injuries can occur. Tons of things can occur. And we need to be able to think about and isolate, is it that something else or is it the actual treatment? So the reversal design is where you start off with a baseline where you measure the severity of the behavior. You then institute a treatment period where if you see the behavior, whether the behavior is reduced. And then if the treatment period does reduce the behavior, you return back to baseline, remove the treatment, and see if the behavior returns to the previous levels. And if it does, then as Dr. Fox says, you have established scientifically that it was the treatment that caused the reduction in behavior. So again, visually, you start with a baseline. This is where you just measure pre-treatment how extreme the behavior is. You then implement your treatment condition. And again, the challenge is that when that treatment occurs, just coincidentally, when you're dealing with one person, the probability is high enough that it's of a concern. Something else might have coincided with the beginning of that treatment. If your panic attacks are reduced or the behavior is reduced here, we don't know. Is it the treatment or is it that something else? So what we do is we remove the treatment, the assumption being that that something else continues. And if the panic attacks return to baseline levels, that means logically it could not have been the something else because the something else is still there. Had to have been the treatment. On the other hand, if the panic attacks remain reduced, then logically it could not have been the treatment because the treatment is gone. It had to have been that something else. And you might be critically thinking, well, what if the treatment begins and the something else begins, and then the treatment ends and the something else also ends? And this is why occasionally, especially if it's a very important behavior, they will do this a few times. So they will reverse treatment multiple times, and you have your typical ABA design, but you can also have ABA-BA designs, and depending upon how important it is to make sure that it's your treatment, you can have an ABA-ABA design, as many reversals as you feel required. All right, so that was the reversal design. The other one is multiple baseline across, in this case, situations or behaviors is the two that we mentioned. So multiple baseline across behaviors, that takes into account that you are often trying to change multiple different behaviors. So most people have a few things that they could stand to improve upon in their life, especially with mental illness. Oftentimes they are comorbid with other mental illnesses. So if you did not want to reverse treatment for whatever purpose, if this person was a danger to themselves, then what you can do is you can institute multiple baselines where you identify 3 behaviors and you start treating the first at the end of the first baseline and see if the behavior is reduced, but you leave the other 2 untouched, untreated, and see if their behavior maintains its levels. If only the behavior that was treated is reduced and the others are maintained, that is good evidence that it is the treatment. Because if something else was causing a change in behavior, you have a chance that it would affect this behavior and or this behavior and or this behavior. So this targeted effect is good evidence that it's just the treatment. And because we're not reversing, that treatment continues. And then at the end of the second baseline, we would start treating the second behavior. And again, we're looking for that pattern where only the behavior that has begun treatment changes while the other one is maintained. And once again, the idea is that if something else began here, it's got a 50-50 chance of affecting either of these behaviors. So a targeted change in just the behavior that's getting the treatment, that is good evidence that it was that behavior it was the treatment that was effective. And then of course, at the end of the third baseline, we would treat that final behavior. All right, so any questions about that before we take a look at the Harry video, the conclusion to the saga of Harry's treatment? We're all good? All right. So we are going to go back to the Harry video now. So as you recall, this was a case of a single case reversal design. It was also a sort of hidden multiple baseline across behavior designs, and we'll see exactly why I call that a hidden one today. And again, it was treating a patient with self-injurious behavior, and just so that you know, that link, that video is available at that link. And let me just cue it up here, and we will begin in just a moment. All right.
Briefly, the program was
Burn my restraints. I'm not going to talk. When you you,
we were gratified because Harry was remaining out of restraint.
All right, so we were right about here. Okay, so just to recap, Harry had just self-abused. The consequence was that his restraints were taken away for 5 minutes. So this treatment day here began with a baseline period where they had no treatment instituted for Harry. They took him out of restraints, and there was no consequences for self-abuse, and they measured how much does he self-abuse. This gives them a level against which to compare their treatment. They are now in the treatment phase, and the treatment phase is that they take his restraints off, and he can earn his restraints back by completing a task. And if he self-abuses during that task, they take the restraints away for 5 minutes. So that is the treatment that they've instituted. And now we're going to see if that treatment causes a decrease in his self-abusive behavior. Okay, so just real quick right now, notice that Harry, one of the other behaviors, and this is going to tie into the multiple baseline across behaviors design, one of the other behaviors that Harry exhibited that they wanted to reduce was this intimidation factor where he got really close into the face of the experimenter. So you can see that he's right up there right in Dr. Fox's face. But notice that Dr. Fox is not doing anything about that at this point in time. Dr. Fox is not really telling Harry, look, get out of my face. He's not really telling Harry, look, there's going to be consequences if you get into my face. He's just kind of letting it go. He's just kind of saying, you know, you're not going to get your restraints. We're going to play some ball. So notice how that changes later on when they decide to treat that behavior.
Yeah.
The counting was replaced by the ball throwing activity because Harry was spending increasing amounts of time out on restraints, which was our goal. As a result, we needed to employ more complex activities in order to keep him appropriately occupied. Also, catching the ball gave him something appropriate to do with his hands.
Who are you going to throw the ball to? Well, that's right. Now you catch it. I want you to catch it, but go your hands. Well, if you don't catch it, I'm leaving. No. Good. Catch, Harry. Good. Throw, Harry. Well, again. Here you go. Good catch, Harry. Good catch. Ready? Catch it. Good. Hey, catch, Harry. Good throw. Here we go. You ready? Another catch. Very good, Harry. You did nice on the ball. Did a good job on the ball. Take them off and hand them to me, please. Just take them off. Take the restraints off. Right now, Harry, or we're leaving the room with the restraints. No. Take them off and hand them to me. Quick. Come on. Quick. Get that restraint off. Hurry up. If I had to take it off, I'm leaving the room. No. Hand it to me, please. Hand it to me. Take hand out of that pocket. Let's go. Get that one off. Hurry up. If I take it off, I'm leaving. No. Get it off. Hurry up. Take it off.
All right, so you can see that Harry is now self-abusing, so there will be the consequences of them leaving with the restraints. That's part of the treatment procedure.
Now we're leaving because now. He does bullshit, Eric. Yeah. Be quiet. Yeah, boy. First of all, I want you to give me that hug. Give me a hug first.
Asking him to hug me showed him I liked him and that I was not afraid of him, since I placed myself in a vulnerable position by keeping my hands behind my back during the hug. Harry frequently attempted to intimidate people by placing his face near theirs and staring. We decided to treat this non-compliance by not allowing Harry to stare.
Okay, so that is another example of the single sample experimental designs that we were talking about. So they are now starting to treat Harry's close talking, him getting in Dr. Fox's face. So what procedure are they using there? Of the two that we mentioned before, multiple baseline or reversal designs? What is this an example of? What was that? This is an example of multiple baseline. So it's a little bit of a hidden multiple baseline because in this video, they have no point where they're measuring explicitly Harry's close talking. They just mentioned that it's an issue, it's a problem, it's something that they want to deal with. But notice this is like treatment session number 8, I believe. So they started with treatment session number 1. This is now treatment session number 8. And up until this time, they have not treated the close talking. They have not treated the intimidation. So you'll remember when I pointed out in the previous clip where Harry was right in Dr. Fox's face. And Dr. Fox was like, we're going to play some ball and we're going to, then you can get your restraints. So they weren't treating it. They weren't doing anything about it. And that can be thought of as the baseline period for the close talking, the baseline period for that intimidation tactic. What they're going to do now is now they're going to enter in the treatment phase for the intimidation of close talking. So now it's the end of the baseline phase for the close talking. They're going to now start treating it. And if now the intimidation or close talking decreases, then it's good evidence that it's the actual treatment that's effective and not something else. Because something else on treatment session number 1, if something else was causing Harry's decreased self-abuse, it had just as much of a chance of affecting the self-abuse as it did of affecting that intimidation. So the fact that the treatment for self-abuse caused the self-abuse to go down, but Harry was still getting in Dr. Fox's face and trying to intimidate him. But then, as we're going to see, once Dr. Fox starts treating the intimidation goes down. The fact that those two behaviors only decrease when they're specifically being treated is multiple baseline across behaviors evidence that it's the treatment that is causing the change in behavior and not some other factors. All right, so they are now going to begin, they're going to continue treating the self-injury, but now they're also going to start treating the close talking.
You understand me? Yeah. You can walk with the quiet? Yeah. No, it's like that, or I don't give you the ball, why you back off. Right.
Okay, so you can see right there, he's no longer allowing Harry to get close into his face. And he's saying the consequence is we're not going to continue on with you earning your restraints until you step away. We're not going to do this until you back off. Whereas before, they were just more than willing to let the intimidation go.
Quietly take the ball over, then we'll go get the chair and the table, and then you can have your restraints. That's Harry, no, I don't want to bring any of that in. If you don't step away, I'm going to talk to you. As soon as you put the chair under the table, then you can have your restraints. You didn't say the magic words. No, I agree. That's another. Yes, you may. What you say? Thank you. You're welcome. leave. Now, if you want to earn those restraints, if you want to get your cuffs back, and you want to go to the TV room, and you're going to do what I say, you understand? Yes. And that says, do not ask me to hold your hand. It says, you're going to do the work that I want you to do. Do you understand me? Yeah. All right. Okay, let's take a book. Would you like a sip of Coke before we get started? Yeah. Like a drink? What do you say? Please.
We had now gone 7 hours since the beginning of the baseline that morning. Harry was growing tired and had received the consequences often enough so that he was beginning to behave quite appropriately. Accordingly, we tried to make the session tasks more interesting and to reinforce his appropriate behavior with Cokes and pretzels. We've been flying by the seat of our pants during each session since we decided what to do with Harry on a moment-to-moment basis. In effect, we took what Harry would give us.
For yourself a little, I want you to pour some into there. Just a little, that's enough. I can't talk to you if you're staring.
All right, so this is one of my favorite interactions where multiple times Dr. Fox treats the intimidation, close talking, and just will not continue until Harry backs away. So again, it shows you that the baseline for the intimidation talking is over, and now they're in the treatment phase.
Now, we will work a couple of. We will work a couple of pages, and then we'll have some Coke and pretzels. Yes. Is that okay? Ellie, I'll help you. On my end, I'll help you with your work. I don't hold people's hands. I only hold hands with my girlfriends. All right, you ready? You know what this is? Pages, I want you to point to them and say what they are. I want you to go pigs and cats, ducks. Stop. Let me see you do it. Pig, cat, ducks. Excellent, excellent. Very good. Let's have a little sip of cat. Would you like 4-year-old? Big one. You want a big one? Yeah. Do you think you've earned a big one? Yes. You sincerely believe that? Yes. You can pour yourself a little more. I think I might have one of those. Can I have one of Coke too? Is it all right if I have one of Coke? Yeah. Would you pour it for me though? Would you pour me this little Coke? And then we'll work a page. And then we're going to leave. Yeah. One more page. That's good. Hey, that's plenty. That's plenty. Thank you. Thank you very much. Here's to you. Here's looking at you, kid. Cheers. After we touch the cup, you're supposed to take a drink too. Watch like this, okay? Now take a drink. And then we're going to skip the cups, and then we're going to go to the TV room. All right? That sounds good? Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good, right? Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, let's work this page. Are you going to give me a hug before we leave? Yeah. You feel like giving me a hug? Yeah. Okay. Am I your friend? Yeah. I am your friend, you know that. But I'm not your friend when you're doing this. Do you like me to do this to you? I mean, no. Well, then why do you do that to me? It doesn't feel nice to do this, does it? It's silly. It's crazy. Some crazy people do. You're not crazy. So keep your face away from me. Because I don't know what I want to do to you all the time. Which becomes silly. Can I, well, that's toast of the day. It was a good day, huh? Bottoms up. Was too long. It was too long? It was a long day. I agree. I agree completely. It was a hell of a long day. Wasn't it? You bet. No. That was a real bitch. It was dry, real bitch today. You know what you're doing? Well, my ready to get that cup. Sure. Let's go get them. You ready? Go get them. They're all yours. Melanie. Melanie. Can you put the cup down here, though? You got the cup in your hand. Melanie. You have a cup in your hand. Melanie. 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 I don't like to mess with cups. I think you should do Melanie, so I don't like to touch him. Melanie.
At the end of the first treatment day, I knew it would not be necessary to use level 2, the full restraint procedure, or level 3, the electric shock procedure.
Oh, I forgot one thing. What did we forget? What's the one thing we forgot? Oh, God. Of course. Okay. Good. Bye bye, Eric. I'll see you around. Yeah. Bye bye.
I could not arrange to work with Harry until 2 weeks later. We began the second program day with a very brief return to baseline to determine if Harry's self-abuse would be high when there were no consequences.
So this return to baseline now is the reversal part of the reversal design. So they had the baseline phase where they just allowed Harry to self-abuse with no consequences. Then they instituted the consequences for his self-abuse, taking away the restraints. You earn the restraints back by not self-abusing. And now to begin this second treatment day, they're going to go back to baseline. So they're going to remove the consequences. They're not going to take Harry's restraints away if he self-abuses. They're not going to put him in timeout for 5 minutes. They're going to remove those consequences, and they're going to see what his self-abuse is like. So in the baseline, they showed that he had a high stable rate of self-abuse. After the first day of treatment, self-abuse went down to the point where he spent over 17 minutes out of restraints with no self-abuse. So the rate of self-abuse went far down during the treatment phase. Now what they want to do is they want to remove the consequences and see what happens to the rate of abuse. If the rate of abuse stays low, then that indicates that it's not the consequences that were causing the change in behavior. It was something else, some other factor caused that change in behavior. And it could be something as simple as just Dr. Fox. Maybe Harry finds Dr. Fox quite intimidating. Maybe people with beards just cause him to not self-abuse. It could be any kind of reason, given the wild and wonderful nature of our minds. So we want to see if the rate of self-abuse is low still when the consequences are removed. That means that it's something else. That means that it's back to the drawing board for Dr. Fox. If, on the other hand, once they remove the consequences in this return to baseline, self-abuse goes back up to baseline levels, then that's an indication that it is the consequences, nothing else, that is causing that change in behavior. And then if that's the case, they implement the consequences again to reduce and treat Harry's self-injurious behavior. So let's take a look at what happens and see which one of those cases. Is it the treatment or is it the something else?
If it was, we would have demonstrated that earning the restraints and the timeout consequence had produced the experimental or treatment effect, rather than some other extraneous or unaccounted for variables. Harry's high rate of self-abuse during baseline confirmed that the treatment consequences were responsible for his lack of self-abuse during treatment.
All right, so right there you can see return to baseline, self-abuse comes back at that high stable rate. What that means is that they now can show with very high confidence, very good evidence, that it is the treatment that is causing the decrease in self-abuse. And that's important because, as you're going to see, not only do they continue to treat Harry in this case study here, but then they also instruct his family, they instruct the social workers, they instruct the caregivers on that treatment protocol. They instruct them with the consequences and how to interact with Harry. And they basically say, we have identified this treatment as being effective. And we now want you to do this for Harry for the rest of his life so that he will remain, self-abuse free. And you can only do that ethically as a psychologist if you have identified that it was your treatment that was effective. If you did not identify that, you run the risk of setting up this program with the parents, with the caregivers, with the social workers, and basically sabotaging them and Harry because your program is ineffective. And as soon as that something else changes, he's going to go back to self-abuse and be probably worse off than before because now they're going to think, oh, he's untreatable.
After the return to baseline, we were ready to resume the treatment sessions. In addition to requiring Harry to spend increasingly longer periods of time out of restraints, we wanted to fade out those 2 feet long heavy mental institutional restraints and to replace them with a soft elbow pad such as that worn by skateboarders. When Harry was given these new restraints, which he had never seen before, he was told that his old restraints had been thrown away and that he would never be able to have them again. He would simply have to accept these new restraints. What we had hoped to do was to fade these soft restraints by cutting them each day so that they got smaller and smaller till eventually they would resemble a sleeve garter. At that point, we would attempt to eliminate all forms of restraint. Harry didn't like the new soft restraints. Being very adaptable, he figured out a way to defeat the program by once again placing his arms in his pants as a form of self-restraint. Our program was at the crossroads. This self-restraint presented us with a major problem because he was either self-abusing and or refusing to take his arms out of his pants. To solve this problem, we put Harry in a jumpsuit that had the pockets sewn shut. After testing the pockets, Harry began unzipping the front of the jumpsuit and self-restraining. To stop that, we had Harry wear the jumpsuit backwards, and we pinned the zipper so that he could not remove it. He didn't like the jumpsuit and would self-abuse while wearing it. He continued to try to find a way to self-restrain in the jumpsuit, but of course his efforts were frustrating. After several hours, Harry finally accepted the jumpsuit and the new soft restraints. At that point, we told him that he'd earned his way out of the small treatment room. After a walk up to the administration building to shake hands with the superintendent, we took him to McDonald's for lunch and followed that with a trip to the 7-Eleven store.
Harry, what's the nice spot that you got at the 7-Eleven?
Oh, there's not good chair.
Right, put it out here.
All right, so now this is the reinstitutement of the treatment procedure. Now it's at 2 hours and 17 minutes with out of restraints with no self-abuse. So they demonstrated that the treatment was effective. They've now implemented the treatment, and as we're going to see in the finale of this video, they basically continue to modify this treatment so that it becomes less and less obvious that he has restraints. And then eventually, Dr. Fox steps away from the treatment and hands it off to other individuals, other caretakers, other mental health providers. And it is, again, vitally important that Dr. Fox was able to identify, yes, it is a treatment, because you're giving this to other people to implement, and you need to make sure that your treatment is actually effective.
Good catch, Harry. Hey, Harry.
Well, we're really cooking now. The second 8-hour treatment day ended with a rousing success. Harry had spent 2 hours and 17 minutes out in the community and free of restraints and without self-abusing. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, Harry developed a serious foot infection and was hospitalized for approximately 6 weeks. Upon his discharge from the hospital, he began holding objects in his hands since he refused to wear the soft restraints. He was not self-abusing, but this new form of self-restraint was unacceptable since he refused to let go of the objects or to participate in activities. Once again, we were in a quandary concerning what to do. The answer came when he returned from an outing that he had earned with his parents for not self-abusing. During that outing, Harry's parents had taken him to a restaurant where he began self-restraining by holding drinking glasses full of water in each hand. He really seemed to like the glasses and requested them when he returned to the institution. Following the basic rule of taking what the client gives you, we decided to eliminate the use of the soft arm restraints and to fade those glasses. To fade the glasses, we decided to begin systematically substituting smaller and smaller glasses until we reached a point where we were using small plastic juice glasses. We planned to cut them in half and to keep cutting them until they got smaller and smaller till all Harry had to hold were the rims of the glasses.
All right, so this is a modification that I was talking about, the treatment, but this is still the same treatment. So now the juice glasses or the drinking glasses there are Harry's version of restraints. And what they would still do at this point, you're going to notice Dr. Fox isn't there, but what they've done is they've instructed other individuals to have Harry hand over the glasses, and if he completes a task without self-abusing, you give him the glasses back. But if Harry self-abuses during that task, you take the glasses away for 5 minutes. So it's the same treatment procedure. It's just now the glasses have been substituted actually by Harry for the restraints that they previously used.
Take a sip out of your glasses, Harry. Okay, Harry, you want to take a sip out of that? Take a sip out of your glasses.
Hey, guys. Hold on to these, okay? Those are juice glasses cut in half, Harry. Okay?
Yeah.
You like them?
Yes.
You do? You want to hold on to those from now on?
No. Big ones.
Oh, you don't need big ones. We have the other one.
Okay, there you go.
So the water taste, okay?
Yeah, too small.
Not that small. There's plenty of water in this thing. You like those?
Yeah.
Okay. Those are what you're gonna have from now on, all right?
Yeah.
Okay. They still have water in them and everything.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot easier to carry, okay?
Yeah.
Once Harry was holding the rims, we eliminated them and taught him to self-restrain when he felt agitated by interlocking his fingers in an appropriate fashion. Also, we gave him a wristwatch to wear as an appropriate form of arm restraint.
Where's Dr. Fox?
All right, so I'll pause there. This is just a brief aside, but just to kind of show you the importance of what we're doing here. Why are we here? So when you take a look at Harry's treatment, how people treated Harry, without psychological knowledge, the person who was the meanest to Harry, the person who was the absolute worst to Harry, the person who basically bullied Harry was, in this scenario, Dr. Fox. I mean, there's no way of getting around it. Harry loved one thing in his life. He loved his restraints. What did Dr. Fox say? He said, I'm taking those restraints. Harry then had to jump through hoops to get his restraints, right? Dr. Fox was basically saying, I have your restraints, and if you want them, you better count to 100 or I'm taking them away, right? It's literally bully behavior, right? It's literally what you would find on a schoolyard, when people were doing, if bullies were doing that kind of behavior. And yet, psychologically, it was the treatment protocol. And if you delve into Harry more, if you take my introduction to psychology class, we go over this video as well. It was Harry's well-meaning parents that tried their best, but did not know the psychological principles underlying behavior and made Harry worse. So they tried their best and actually ended up increasing Harry's self-abuse to levels that required him to be institutionalized because they loved Harry and they cared for Harry. And then you get somebody like Dr. Fox, who looks like the meanest individual in the world from the outset, right? You have one thing you love, restraints, I'm taking them away. You want them back, you better do what I say. That's a horrible person to the normal society. As psychologists, we know that he's implementing these treatments and he's eventually going to help Harry into self-abuse. And I just love to see this scene here because as horrible as Harry must have thought Dr. Fox is, there's some acknowledgement, there's something deep inside where he knows that Dr. Fox has done this wonderful thing for him, and he's literally saying, where's Dr. Fox? Where is this guy that cared for me and that I actually care for? And it's just my little bit of an aside why we're here. It's not enough to have compassion and care for people if you don't know what you're doing. Harry's parents had compassion and care for him. They inadvertently, I hate to say this, they made him worse. They made Dr. Fox's job harder. And you can clearly tell that Dr. Fox cares for Harry. I mean, he kept asking him for hugs and make sure that, and I don't think you can put up with that day. There's not enough money in the world if you don't care for these individuals. But you need to have the techniques and the knowledge and the theories that we're developing here. And importantly, for this class, you need to know that the treatment worked. Because as well-being as you are, if you hand Harry off to other people and say, hey, here's this treatment and it's ineffective, you are going to make the end result so much worse for a person like Harry.
There's a major question that must be asked regarding any successful treatment program. Is the treatment effect maintained after the program is turned over to the staff and parents? In Harry's case, the answer was very gratifying.
All right, so in Harry's case, notice they turned the treatment program over to the staff and to the parents. Was it going to be effective? In Harry's case, it was very gratifying. Yes, it was effective. It was going to be effective because they had demonstrated through reversal and multiple baseline procedures that it was a treatment that was effective. It wasn't something else. It wasn't Dr. Fox. It was the actual treatment. So when they handed over the treatment, they would have high confidence that, yes, it's going to continue to be effective.
All right, very good, Harry.
Maintaining Harry's behavior change for the past 2 years has been an ongoing process. Being bright and adaptable, Harry continues to display non-compliant behavior on occasion to test his family and the institutional staff.
I asked for pretzels, Harry.
Let's have some pretzels, Jim.
Okay.
As a result, they have had to remain very consistent and contingent with Harry, and to continue to try to provide him with challenging, stimulating activities and tasks. Because of their efforts, Harry has continued to make progress, whereas my own involvement with him has been reduced to that of an occasional advisor. As for Harry, the past 2 years have taught him that there are exciting alternatives to self-abuse and the wearing of bizarre restraints. He is becoming more independent and appropriate, as evidenced by his growing of a beard and choosing eyeglasses as his preferred form of restraint. Once Harry accepted appropriate forms of restraint, he was ready to begin participating in a variety of normal, highly reinforcing activities, such as working at the institution's vocational center. To maintain Harry's interest in these activities, he is paid tokens after he completes them. He then uses the things as visits home, TV time, and treats. Through this token program, we hope to accomplish our ultimate goal of having Harry live in the community. There is no mystery concerning why treatment programs such as Harry's succeed. Meaningful and long-lasting behavioral change occurs when a professional works directly with the staff and client during the initial program stages. When family, staff, and administrative cooperation is maximal, when everyone cares and commits to the program, and when the program remains flexible by evolving with the client's progress.
All right, so I'll let the credits run just to wrap this up. But any questions about what we just watched? Reversal design, multiple baseline designs, anything like that? It's all good? All right. Yeah, wow. So just as a sort of final wrap up to this, that the change that occurred in Harry because of these psychological techniques. And again, it's always good to remember why we're here. What are we doing here? What is this all about? And the change that he had came after 25 years of self-abuse. So for a quarter of a decade, this individual was self-abusing themselves. And within the space of a few months, Dr. Fox reduced that self-abuse down far enough to so that within the space of a couple of years, they had Harry enter the vocational program. They had Harry enter into their educational program. So literally knowing what to do, knowing the techniques, using these experimental techniques to isolate the fact that a treatment is actually working can undo the change is amazing. It's 25 years of self-abuse, and within the span of a couple of months, it's reduced almost to nil. And within the span of a couple of years, they've gotten Harry to the point where they're training him up. So again, I love showing this film. I'll keep showing it until forever's. But anyways, it's just again this indication of why is it that we do what we do? What is this all about? Why do I continue to try to? There we go. So what is this all about? So again, just a nice illustration, single case reversal design, multiple baseline across behaviors, and just a great indication of what psychology can do. So unless there's any other questions, that's all I wanted to cover for today. So I guess that is it. We are good. So enjoy your weekend. Make sure that you are working on that intro. Make sure that you're doing what you need to do in terms of the peer review. And I will see you all on Tuesday.